This podcast contains explicit language and other content some listeners may find disturbing. The Scandal Sheet Podcast presents 9/11 Recollections. Part 1, The World Trade Center. September 11, 2001, 8:56 a.m. Eastern Time. The North Tower. 9:03 a.m. Eastern Time. The South Tower.
What's this other jet doing? What's this other jet doing? Holy fuck!
Oh my god! Oh my god! Jesus fucking Christ!
Don't touch it.
Oh my god!
And today I am joined by two Scandal Sheet favorites. Listeners will remember these New Yorkers from a recent lighthearted episode that covered the nation's hot dog eating contest and competitive eating in general. And that was a very popular episode, so we definitely wanted to invite them back, although today's episode is, of course, much more somber. Without further ado, here they are again, Jason from Long Island and Rob from the Upper East Side. Welcome back, gentlemen.
Thank you, Ted. Good to be here.
You guys deliberately have not really told me the details of your story, so it's a surprise to me, so I can ask questions spontaneously. It'll be a surprise to our audience, but I mean, as you suggested, Jason, you want to go first? I mean, what was going on the morning of September 11th, 2001 for you?
The first thing that just jumps out at me, and it was just such a beautiful day. Today is September 6th, and as we were talking, it's 90 something degrees here in New York City. But I mean, it was just, the first thing was it was just such an absolutely beautiful day. Not a cloud in the sky. It was 80 degrees, and that's the first thing that I remember. And at the time, I was working. I was working in Jersey City, and for a golf reference, my building faced across the Hudson River, directly pin high to the World Trade Center. And
okay, so you're like a mile away, right? That's how wide the Hudson River is.
Yeah, more or less. Yeah, I'd say a mile, maybe a mile and a half. Yeah, but no, that's fairly accurate.
But that's pretty close. I mean, when you stand in Brooklyn and you look over, that's also a mile, the East River, and I'm like, wow, I can see everything. So, I mean, it's not.
I mean, it's really, with the sky, with the building that I was working at, and with the big, the windows, it was really kind of like. It was surreal watching it from essentially like, just a big, a movie screen. And what I remember is at the time, what I was known for at my job, which was financial related, was being, my nickname was the news hawk, because when something would come across what you literally used to just be a scrolling news story, it was just scrolling events. I was on a trading floor of about 350 people. And I was the first one to pick the news off of the news tape. So I literally screamed out, because was part of the job, to literally just scream stuff out across a room. I screamed, I said, hey guys, it says a plane just, hit the World Trade Center. So I went across, from the trading room across, into the conference room that looked out over the skyline of Manhattan. Mm-hmm. And I could see smoke coming out of the top of the World Trade Center. I always got confused between one World Trade or two World Trade. And because the first plane hit from north to south, it didn't look like very much to me, because I didn't see the gaping hole that you would have seen if, you were either looking at it from north or south. So, my first instinct was, my first thought was, maybe it was just a small plane. It doesn't.
And that's what we heard in D.C. We heard it was a Cessna, and it was like one of the totally accidental kind of a thing. And so it didn't seem that serious until then when you have a second plane, all of a sudden everybody's like, okay, well, that can't be a coincidence, right?
Yeah. No, and it's you never thought that. I mean, the World Trade Center was attacked once before.
Right. In the 90s, right?
Yeah, and I think it was in 93 or 90. I think it was in 93.
But that was guys taking a truck into the garage filled with explosives. It was a very different tactic, right?
Yeah, and for as crazy as it was, I don't really remember putting much. I mean, it sounds sad to say, but it was like it wasn't. It didn't have the impact. It didn't have, and maybe, and again, this sounds terrible. It's kind of like nowadays, if there's a school shooting, the first, people just want to know what the death count was, or how many people died, and if only 10 people died in this shooting, is it more of a national tragedy if 50 or 60 people passed away? And and it's kind of crazy, but that's the sad mentality. But for whatever reason, maybe it was just I was in college that I didn't, it didn't really register. But in any event, so people in the building were, we were watching it and contemplating, should we leave? We were in Jersey. It's not much of a threat, but. And keep in mind, if you're looking across the Hudson River, Newark Airport was directly to my right, and that's where the second plane came from, and I watched it. I watched the plane.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. Just from Newark Airport. Wow.
So out of my peripheral vision, I saw the plane, and I followed it and watched it. And again, the trading desk was behind me. The trading floor, you had to go through like an elevator corridor. There was the conference room, you had the elevator corridor, and then you had the trading room. And I was in the conference room, and like most trading desks, they have multiple televisions on. So what I remember is watching the plane hit and the screams coming from the trading desk behind me.
We're talking about the second plane hitting the South Tower at 9:03. Is that correct?
That's correct. So what I remember is watching the plane hit and the screams from the trading room behind me. And when I went back to the trading room, I just also remember somebody saying, "Hey, listen, don't even consider staying in the building anymore." And this is a family friendly show, but saying, I want everybody out of the effing building right now. And what I remember is,
how tall was your building?
I would say I think it was like 30 flights, and we were on the 20th floor. So we walked down the stairwell to get out.
Right.
And I remember the door opening, a fire door opening. And I remember two things. One is the bright sunlight hitting me on the face. And I remember, because on those 20 steps on the way down, the thoughts that were going through my head, knowing that this was an attack, and having my brother and my cousins and my wife, my girlfriend at the time, in the city, I remember it was the overall anger. And I tell people this all the time. If there was somebody, when I opened that door, if there was a representative, let's just say from the Marines, that was ready to hand me, an M16 rifle and say, go get some, I probably would have enlisted at that very moment, because it was not just an attack on New York City. It was an attack on my industry. It was an attack on our country. And I just remember this overwhelming, just this anger. And again, yeah, if somebody would have handed me a rifle and said, or sign here, to get some, I probably would have. And then, I don't want to jump around, too much. I mean, there's so many emotions, but, I think everything from, first of all, cell phones were completely out. There was no communications at all. You couldn't call your loved ones. The only thing that were working were payphones and landlines. Not even, not even cordless phones at your house. So there was really no way to get in touch with anybody. A lot of the cell towers were on top of the World Trade Center. But really, so for the most part, I just stood on the waterfront watching everything play out. And I think we got our news from there was a construction crew, and they just had transistor radios, which, the big radio station in New York is 1010 Winds. Everybody was just huddling around this one construction worker with a transistor radio. And that's where we were getting our news from. And, nobody knew if how many more planes, or if the Empire State Building was going to be hit, or, it was just pure chaos. But, people crying, and, I know I'm skipping around a lot, but I ultimately remember when the first tower fell. And in my mind, I thought that, okay, the planes hit, the fire department will get up there, they'll put it out, and we'll rebuild. So it just in a million years, and maybe it's a New York thing, you or I don't want to say toughness, but we got hit. But I thought that we would never go down, and it's kind of like, there were one of the thoughts that came into my head. So when the tower went down, I actually physically went down to like one knee, because all the energy was just zapped out of me, and I couldn't believe how surreal it was. But the line from Raging Bull came to my mind, because it's the scene where De Niro just gets, beaten to chopped meat by Sugar Ray Robinson. But he walks over to Sugar Ray and he says, you never got me down, Ray. You never got me down. And I thought that what happened would be very much like that. But when the tower went down, yeah, no, it zapped all my energy, and I literally went down to one knee. And then not too long afterwards, we heard the engine of an F. I don't know my airplanes, but there was, I think it was an F-14 flying over. And I remember it's
just a little bit late, huh?
Well, that's very funny, because I remember punching my fist in the air. Until this day, I don't know if it was a combination of, all right, somebody finally has our back, and where the F were you? And I think it was a combination of both.
Well, there was, ironically, there was a national war games test being conducted on, and I assume somebody must have known this, which is why they may have chosen this day, but there was a national war games test about terrorists taking over, hijacking planes. And so the Air Force was involved, the FAA was involved, everybody was involved, and that was part of the confusion, because this was all happening. The test that they were wargaming on was actually more expansive. It was like taking over the whole country. So when this happened, everybody was like, this is part of the test, right? And then it's like, and everyone's like, no, this is not part of the test. But it was hard to convince people because it was just it seemed like a coincidence. Obviously, it couldn't have been a coincidence, but it did seem like it to them. I mean, and this is in the 9/11 Commission report too. And that's why it took a long time for real jets were being scrambled to play war games. And then, okay, well, where's the jets that we need to actually go after these planes that we can see are off track? So, a lot of confusion. Slowed things down. And then, of course, if you're talking about, okay, going from the Trenton Airport just over the river, I don't think there'd be any time to scramble planes.
No, and then I was stuck in Jersey because they had closed all the tunnels in every way into. So I sat there. I had a colleague of mine who let me sleep over his place, but just for the most part, we just spent that beautiful day, from day turned to dusk to night, just watching this. This smoldering pile that used to be, such a big part of New York City, and you couldn't even wrap your head around, how many people had passed and how many survivors they, would be able to, to pull out. And then, it's just, we'll go into it, a little bit later about, just. I'd like to try to talk about, some of the beautiful things that came out of it, but and there were, as crazy as that sounds, but I'll hand it over to Rob for now.
Brother Rob.
Yeah. By the way, just going back a little bit, I actually worked in World Trade Number 2. I think for a little bit over a year when I first got out of college.
Was that the South Tower? Is number 2 the South? I forget the names. Okay. So that was just as high as number 1, like 110 floors or something like that?
Yeah. And
was that scary as hell? Actually going there every day?
No, because this was even before what you had spoken about before, where there was the bombing in the basement.
Okay, so this is the 80s or something like that, or
it was just kind of one of those things where you took the view in, you took the fact that it was this mecca where when people came to New York and they made their itinerary, they would say, well, all right, bump, 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 World Trade Center, bump, bump, bump. And I remember a few times in the summer, our parents, had visited me because they used to do.
Is there something you want to tell me finally?
Sorry.
I know that you're mommy's favorite, but I didn't know the real reason why.
But there used to be lunch hour. There used to be bands that would play in between the two buildings, and it was a great place to work. And I remember one of the things which will come into play when we talk about it in a little bit is that the buildings were actually built to have a little bit of sway because of hurricane level wind or weather or storms. So they were built to actually sway a little bit, and it was always a little freaky how when I'd go to the men's room, when you look into the toilet, you would see the water just ever so slightly moving back and forth because that's how the buildings were designed.
That's weird. Let me just interrupt real quick. So first time I went to New York City was in 1990 with my then wife, and then we had dinner in the Windows on Top of the World restaurant. And like you say, we had arranged in advance. We had a window seat and stuff like that. But you could see just the frames of the window, and you could look out at the skyline, and you could see everything going.
Yep.
And it was like, we're swaying. We are swaying. Yeah.
And that's why I wanted to mention that, just to give it that extra layer of personal connection, which I think is also, when one of the interesting things about September 11th is that I don't think it's just a New York event or tragedy or happenstance or what will you. You could talk to anybody from anywhere in the entire world, and they have a story around it. However, that stated, I think, and I endorse and I agree with getting two guys who were here in New York, because for as personal it is to some people who were around, literally around the world, on the other side of the world that day, for two people who were literally here, it just adds that extra that extra layer of, like I said before, personal connection to it. That when my wife and I would walk downtown and we wanted to go to a certain area, we would always look for the World Trade. We would look for the Twin Towers and then use that as our guide to, all right, we're going in the right direction. All right, we're not. All right, we need to, that was the marker.
No, right. I mean, the World Trade Center and then the Empire State Building in Midtown. It's like, okay, now I know where I am because of those two things.
And once you pass the Empire State Building, once you pass the Empire State Building, then it was the Twin Towers.
Right.
Again, not confusing it. A lot of times people say the World Trade Center, but even though the entire area was decimated, for the purpose of this conversation, we're talking about the Twin Towers because both were hit.
Well, number 7 went down too.
Later in the day, I think at around 5:00.
Yeah.
So it, like Faye said, the weather was perfect, just a perfect day out. And at the time, I was working at the New York Times, which was on 43rd between 8th and Broadway. And
okay.
I'm walking. And again, and something else that I think that we should keep in mind is this was, what are we coming up on, 22 years? Is that what it is? 22 years ago? Is that how long? 20?
Next week, yeah.
Yeah. Keep in mind that the technology was not what it was. So
no.
I live 10 blocks away and I'm walking to the New York Times as I did every morning, and my cell phone rings. And keep in mind, my cell phone then is not the cell phone that we all have now. It's not a smartphone.
It's probably a
no. This thing didn't come out until 2007. So 6 years later.
And terrible connection.
Yeah.
And my mother calls and she says, "Are you okay?" I said, "Yeah, sure. What are you talking about?" She said, "Well, I know that you have a client in the World Trade Center," and I did, on the 90th floor, I think. Oh, he's amazed by the view when I used to go up there and visit. So she was calling to see that I was okay. She said, "Well, a plane crashed into the World Trade Center, to the Twin Towers." And like Face said, I think everybody, to an extent, thought it was a small, like one of those JFK Jr. planes that
right.
And
bad pilot, heart attack, something.
Right.
Yeah.
But if it were now, we would all, be able to quickly look at our phones and see exactly what's going on. But when I got in and I went through, there was a main entrance to the New York Times in Times Square, but there was also a back entrance. So I went through there and there were people standing around crying and looking very frantic and panicked, and I didn't know what was going on. I couldn't possibly fathom to the degree to which it had happened. And I sat at my desk, which was out on the floor. We didn't have offices. And we all at that time went to our laptops, because even surprisingly, I guess, the New York Times didn't have TVs on the floor. So we'd go.
Really? That's weird. Even in 2001.
Yeah. But it wasn't at that point, nobody really knew what was going on until somebody on the floor yelled out, "They just hit World Trade number 2. And then everybody was like, "Wait, what? What?"
That's the second one, right? That's south. 903. First was 846, according to the 9/11 report.
The important context here is that there's a breaking news story right now. We go online and we take a look, and instantaneously, through whatever social media or direct website, through a news outlet, you're able to see everything that's going on. That wasn't the case then. And there, floors didn't have the Wi-Fi access that we do now. So I went onto my laptop and I took a look, and
just let's just clarify: you weren't a newsroom person.
No,
you were a sales guy for the New York Times. Okay, you were on the business side. So I imagine in the newsroom, they probably did have some TVs or something or whatever.
They did,
but okay.
But again, and I think that's again to talk about the overall period of time that we're in. News is not readily available. Access to exactly what's going on at the moment is not available. So there's a lot of people looking around going, what's going on?
No, the internet was still sort of in its infancy, the 1996 Telecommunications Act, which basically privatized the internet. That's only 5 years prior.
Right. And what we did have at the time, Cliff Clavin, is that what we did have at the time was because of what happened, because of where they hit, so many of the electrical outlets and electrical companies were down there. So when they hit it, we had blackouts in the city. We had legit patches where we couldn't get through. So I couldn't call family and friends on my cell phone.
Well, Jason said the cell phone towers for the city were on top of the World Trade Center.
Right, exactly right.
So if you take out the World Trade Center, you take out everybody's cell phone, basically.
So it took everybody's cell phones.
Yeah.
So it was a time where the ensuing day was just chaos. It just absolute chaos. And my wife had called on the main number and she said, "Can you come home?" Very upset. So I got back, and one of the other things that stands out for me on that day, again, as a New Yorker, we lived on 57th Street between 8th and 9th, and we had a nice one-bedroom with views of Central Park looking north.
Looking north, right?
Looking north.
Right, not south.
Not south. And one of the things that stands out for me, that stands out for us, is the dichotomy of looking out at this beautiful day, perfect, not a cloud in the sky, north, and having the TV on right next to the window, and knowing that there's just a nightmare beyond comprehension going on south. So
could you see the World Trade Center? You said New York Times was 43rd Street? So you're like right around Times Square or something?
Yeah, there were too many big towers
in the way blocking the view. Okay.
To actually be able to see the Twin
Towers.
Okay.
Okay.
But I had later in that day, I think there was a morbid curiosity for so many people of what's going on, what's happening.
Sure.
So I got on my bike and I rode downtown, and first I went west, and the army, the police, they stopped everybody. What was it, around 23rd Street, maybe 14th Street, something like that?
I'll probably say we're at 23rd Street.
Yeah, they didn't let me go. So what I did was, and again, I was 22 years younger, so even dumber than I am now. I rode east and then south, and what happened when I did that was the troops that were there, it was bedlam. So they didn't stop me. So there were even points where I saw like a group of cops. I saw a group of military, and I wanted to check, and I said, am I able to keep going? And they're like, yeah, sure. So I got pretty close, and then what happened is that. And I've done this bike ride around the city 1,000 times, just almost literally 1,000 times. But the lights were out, and what happened before the lights went out was that as I was riding, dust was kicking up from my tires. I mean, I saw the dust, and the lights went down, and you literally couldn't see. And I was just like, I got scared. I got really, really scared.
What time of day is this?
And I wanted the day of.
I know, but what hour of the day was it? You're saying the smoke blacked out the sun? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying it was later in the day after the sun went down.
Oh, okay.
So there was the only light came from the natural sunlight, and now it's dark. And I had to turn around and just try to get home. And at that point, it was almost impossible even to figure out what was north, what direction is north. Because as you're trying to zigzag through these tanks and police cars and papers and debris, I got turned around, not literally.
And the streetlights were off because, like you said, a lot of the electrical companies went down.
Yeah, we were dark.
Okay.
Even just making it home was terrifying, and there's no way. And I remember riding up, blabbering on face.
No, but I'm just thinking about you riding down to the World Trade Center the day of at night by yourself. How dumb of you would do that. I love you, but that's just dumb.
Remember a few minutes ago when I said dumb?
I don't remember that, but I'm telling you again because I didn't hear it. That was so stupid of you to do.
Yeah.
I'm like actually mad at you for riding down there.
Yeah. Yeah. It was dumb. It was stupid.
How far did you get? What street did you get?
Scared. I got pretty close. And the reason that I went was, one, I had to see for myself, or try to see for myself, what was going on. And two, I truly didn't believe that I would get as far as I did. I really just thought that people, that somebody would say, you got to turn around the way that they did on the West Side. So, yeah. And so that was, the city was just, what an awful time.
But you know what? I mean, going back to, try to switch it up a little bit. It's because with things like this or with any tragedy, you try to pull some good out of it. And when you see Boston Red Sox fans, saluting, New York Yankee fans, there's I thought, I mean, we're Met fans on for better or worse, but that's the epitome of, people putting aside their differences, for the cause. And very much like when, we had the Boston bombing, Yankee fans, were saluting, the Boston Red Sox fans. But, I'll never forget. And I know I'm bouncing around, but, people really, when you're a kid and you take a field trip to a firehouse, I don't think people, at least I never really fully appreciated, what firemen and our cousin Ronnie, who passed away from working, at the pile at Ground Zero.
Can you tell us more about that, Jason?
Yeah.
Can you tell us more about your cousin?
Yeah. So our cousin Ronnie, Ronald Weintraub, and I will say his name. I know we try to keep away from using names, but his name should be mentioned. It's funny because Ronnie grew up, out on Long Island, and and when he got older and got married and had children, moved even further out to Long Island, and he would commute, pretty much, I think, he would drive an hour or so every day into the city. And he wound up getting, at the time, was a great assignment. He was working Midtown South. And Midtown South is the precinct where usually you have to know somebody to get into Midtown South. It's got this prestige. And at the time, it was, Giuliani had cleaned up the Times Square. It was the Disneyfied or Disneyfication of Times Square. So it was really kind of like a cushy job. It wasn't the Times Square of, what was it, the Midnight Cowboy anymore, or, the seediness. So the extent of the job was taking, Ronnie would say, I hate taking photos with all these tourists because they would want to take a picture with a New York City cop standing next to the cop car. And Ronnie would always joke around.
Or the naked cowboy.
Then they get the naked. It went from Midnight Cowboy to the Naked Cowboy. And
in his tidy whities, yeah.
Right, and dirty Elmos.
Yeah.
But
so different than the late 80s, yeah.
Which, I mean, that's a whole, me and my friends buying fake ID and them accidentally spelling my friend Brian's name Brain instead of Brian and not giving him his money back for his fake ID. So he was forever known as Brain because that's what it said on his ID. But in any event, Ronnie would always say, oh, I hate the city. And, if anything were to ever happen, like a terrorist attack, I'm getting in the car and I'm just driving straight upstate. I'm going to have, nothing to do with it. And, oddly enough, or ironically enough, when September 11th happened,
When push came to shove.
When push came to shove, not only did, Ronnie do, what was totally expected of him, like so many other people, Ronnie assisted in the search and rescue efforts and worked the pile without any protective gear, and ultimately, 4 years later, passed away of bile duct cancer, which, essentially, it's one of the rarest forms of cancer, and at least he was officially recognized as a as a 9/11 victim of 9/11.
A hero.
He was, yeah. I mean, yes, he was a hero, and he
wasn't even given a mask.
No,
not even a mask.
No, most of the people weren't. Most of the people weren't. Yeah, I mean, that's
wow.
Till this day. I mean, and again,
even with all that smoke and everything, it just seemed like common sense. You'd be like, okay, I think I really need a mask with all of this toxic shit in the air.
No, but again, to speaking directly to, you would think that firefighters, when a building collapsed, they would stop continuing up the flights of stairs to rescue people. But that's what heroes do. And I just, it speaks to the character that, if somebody could have pulled one person out, just one person, or save, one of their own, or pull, one of their brothers or sisters out of, the rubble, they did it selflessly. I really don't think that a lot of people thought about masks. I mean, with all, keep in mind, when the World Trade Center was built, how much asbestos and everything else, that wasn't up to code, or
that was a huge thing. The asbestos abatement, blah blah blah. It was going to cost like $10 billion or something. That was a huge thing.
Yeah, and just so yeah. I mean, in terms of that, just loss. I mean, I lost a fraternity brother whose wife was, I think, 7 months pregnant. And again, I'll mention his name, Brian James Terenzi, and who worked at Cantor Fitzgerald. And it's just just walking around the city in the days after it, and seeing all of these posters of family members looking for their loved ones, and seeing all the faces, and in the back of your mind knowing that most of these people were never going to come home. It was it was truly humbling. And Rob, you said this to me to put things in perspective, and you've said it to me. I don't know if it was weeks or months after, and I was
the papers.
Yeah, the papers. I was preoccupied about something stupid with work, like everybody eventually bitches and moan about their job and everything. And, you said to me something to the effect of, Jay, what does it really matter? Like, think of how important all of those papers were to all those people in the World Trade Center. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it was just, trash blowing around in the wind. And I remember that hit home to me.
Yeah, you would see on the floor, reams and reams of paper, paper being reports and documents, and you pick it up and there's an expense report, and then there's a a sales update document, and it was so important that morning. It's just garbage on the floor now.
Yeah. And I think the overall respect, I remember like when things kind of got back to normal, I mean, things didn't get back to normal for a long time. You know what? Speaking of, not getting back to, things getting back to normal, it was funny because where um, we grew up in Brooklyn, but then we moved to Queens. We moved to Howard Beach, and Howard Beach is literally at the end of the airport. It's essentially at the end of the runway for JFK Airport. So, for a large portion of our lives, the Concorde would wake us up on, at 9:15 every Saturday morning. The windows would shake and shatter. So, we've, seeing airplanes in the sky our whole lives, it was just in a second nature. And then to not see when they ultimately shut down the airspace, to look up, for I think maybe a week, they shut down the airspace over. All airspace was maybe shut down for, I don't know if it was like for 4 or 5 days or a week.
It was a long time.
Yeah. Yeah. But to not see planes in the sky was so bizarre and surreal. But to see that first plane back in the sky once they finally opened up the airspace, I'll never forget seeing that first airplane and thinking of an airplane as something else that used to just be a way of transportation. To think of an airplane as a possible weapon, or just to see, hear the sound of an airplane for the first time after not seeing it, that's something that, completely freaked me out. And not just freak you out, but it just put it just put an airplane in a perspective that you never thought of an airplane before, or seeing an airplane just flying in the sky.
And all the firehouses had flowers in front of them, and people would come in and bring them food, and the police stations as well. And everybody in New York was wearing NYPD baseball caps, FDNY T-shirts. I remember my wife and I were in Central Park, and we were on the Great Lawn, just laying out, and not that much longer after a few weeks. And a fire engine came in Central Park along the roadway there. At the time it was open, the roads there were open to traffic. They're not now. And when the fire engine went by, everybody on the Great Lawn, had to be hundreds of people, everybody stood up and started applauding. I can't tell you what I had for breakfast today, but almost 22 years ago, I can so clearly see that. Everybody in the entire park at once just standing up and applauding. It speaks to, you had said earlier, there were beautiful things that came out of it. I would respectfully say that I think there were positive things or life reaffirming things that came out of it, or beautiful things, I guess.
Well, let me ask you, because on that subject, because we're over an hour now, so we should probably steer towards a conclusion. But as you bring that up, it's been, like you guys said, 22 years, or will be next week. Has the city healed, and if it or can it ever really heal? Is this like getting paralyzed from the waist down? You're never really going to recover. You just learn to accept it. I mean, what was the trajectory of, I've got to accept this thing?
Yeah, Face, I'll take that at first.
Okay.
I think, and it's a great question, one I never thought about, and as I do right now, it almost pains me to say it, but I think to a very large extent, the old expression, time heals all wounds, you never forget, especially for the people who were there at that time and cognizant.
Yeah.
To a large extent, they've rebuilt the World Trade Center. There's only one. That to me is always incredibly, incredibly jarring when I see one. But I think to tourists, I think to people who come there, I think to people who didn't experience it, it's more of a curiosity than anything else. But I don't. But I think the city is healed from it. I really do. That's a great thing, and that's a terrible thing. Yeah.
It's a great question, and I don't think I could be any more. But in terms of the city, it's not it's a young person's city now. It's you're either extremely wealthy in Manhattan, or you're a young person, living your best life.
And it was not that way in 2001. You're saying that like a middle class person could still live there?
Yeah, and keep in mind there were a lot of people, from all the boroughs that were in, from everywhere, from New Jersey, from Westchester. I mean, there were so many.
Right, people who live in Queens and they work in Manhattan or yeah.
I'll jump in with Face. I'm so sorry for interrupting.
Yep.
But I'll tell you this, having been on the business end at the New York Times and working in the real estate category, both commercial and residential, I can tell you that the second that those towers went down, there was some very smart, I guess, from a business perspective, detaching emotion from it, which I could never do. But they were already like, okay, here's what we're going to do. Here's our next step on this. We're going to buy up land. We're going to put up buildings. We're going to redevelop. We're going to do a whole bunch of stuff.
Well, the same stuff is going. The same concerns are out there right now about Hawaii. That the people that are there now are going to be, all that land is going to be gobbled up with rich people. But just to go back, for me personally, it'll every September 11th. Every September 11th, I watch all of the As It Happened TV shows, and in the morning I watch the reading of the names every year for the past 22 years. I haven't missed one time.
Really?
And I cry, and I cry in front of my, I cry in front of my daughters, and it gets me every single time. Again, the firemen who were looking up at those buildings. And they knew, 373 firemen, 363, 370, excuse me for not knowing that number. That's a real important number. But I can't go. I still haven't been, nor do I think I have the, I can't go to this 9/11 museum. I would just be a complete wreck. It's still, I purposely, not because I'm a glutton for, not because I'm I like to bring myself back there. Because I don't want to forget. I still want it to be as raw as it was that day. Because it's like people were saying, should September 11th be, should 9/11 be a holiday? And I've always said no, because, I don't think people should be barbecuing and, just taking it, using it as an excuse to just take a day off, or play golf. As a matter of fact, somebody scheduled a meeting on my calendar at work. Just today, somebody scheduled a meeting on September 11th, and a part of me was just like, who does that? Like, who does it? It's September 11th. Like, you shouldn't schedule, don't put anything on my calendar. Don't put anything on my work calendar. It's September 11th. It's
just bad luck. If you're superstitious, it's just bad luck.
No, right? But when it hurts, when it's still so, it's so deep. I don't think, and again, I watched as it unfolded, the television shows, whether it's the Discovery Channel or whatever, and I watch it with my children, and they ask the question, like, it's, why would somebody do that? Why would somebody just take a plane? And, why, to explain that, to your children, and
How old are your daughters? You mentioned you had daughters. Were they alive?
No, they're...
So how do they feel about it?
They know about Cousin Ronnie, and they know that Cousin Ronnie left their cousins who were 6 and 2 respectively when he passed away, and saw what their, how their lives changed from that. They want to know about it, and their schools, they've learned about it through school. And when we sit there, the times that September 11th falls on a Saturday or a Sunday, and we've watched the reading of the names, and now you're seeing the children of some of these firemen and women join the force, and they're reading their father's name who passed away on September 11th. When I mention, when I mention the fact that, some beauty comes out of it, hearing the children of fallen firefighters talking about their dad and following in their footsteps and making a difference, that's some of the derivative, if you want to call it beauty, that came out of, one of the worst days, in our country, in our city, in our world's, lifetime.
Well, and I'll tell you what then, and maybe we'll end on this, like a lingering impact as a New Yorker is to this day, to this year. If someone offers tickets, like Met tickets on September 11th, there's a thought, like, does somebody try to make a political statement by doing something on that day? Is somebody going to take advantage of the visibility that is here, especially in New York, and do something awful again? It's real.
Sort of on that point, before we leave, I did want to ask you guys this question, and if you don't want to answer, just say we decline. But and I asked this to the other person I interviewed about the Pentagon. Are you satisfied with the findings of the Presidential 9/11 Commission as presented in their 585-page report? There's been a lot of, obviously, groups that have disputed those findings. Are you satisfied with them?
Disputed in...
Disputed the conclusions of the report in terms of okay, here's all these things. How come we don't have any, airport security photos of these guys getting on the plane? The controlled demolition video evidence, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I don't. The answer to your question for me is no. The only thing that I've always found.
No, you're not satisfied with the report, or you are satisfied with the report?
I'm completely satisfied with
Okay, you're satisfied with the report.
The only thing that I always found interesting or odd is there's not any clear footage of a plane going into the Pentagon. There's never been any video footage of that. Even that.
Actually, there is some video footage, but it's not a plane. There are documentaries, because there are obviously cameras all around the Pentagon.
Yeah.
And what is going in there doesn't look like an American Airlines.
I've always found that to be peculiar, but no, I'm not one for conspiracy theory. Okay.
Would you say most people in Manhattan sort of buy the establishment thing, or are there people? Or is there a subset of people that are like, no, we think these other alternate things are...
I can tell you that in the almost 22 years since, I've never had one conversation.
Okay.
About that. Literally not one. The question that you just asked is the first time I've ever heard that.
Okay.
Or been asked that. Let me put it that way.
Fair enough.
Yep. Base?
Yeah, no, I was just explaining. I mean, by the way, I like to think that I'm well educated in terms of, hearing all people, all sides, all theories and stuff. But I'm a believer in Occam's razor, and I was explaining it to somebody else. Occam's razor being that usually the most likely, usually the most likely outcome is the answer. I saw everything with my own eyes, and this was, yes, to answer your question, I'm thoroughly satisfied with, the September 11th report. But at the same time, too, that's actually something I wanted to touch on, because in terms of getting back to life after September 11th, I remember the first time Saturday Night Live came back, right? And people were asking, like, how soon is it, like, that we allow ourselves to laugh afterwards, and like even the first time Saturday Night Live came back, or baseball came back, you always asked yourself, can we laugh again? Is it okay to play sports? And all of that, my brother and I, we were raised that laughter, even when you're trying to hide, pain, at least that's the way I am, you have to be able to laugh at everything, and even sometimes, tragedy. Like there's nothing funny about September 11th, or the Holocaust or Nazis. But a big part of the healing. Thanks, Robin. Thanks for the incredulous look. But the point I'm trying to make is, the point I'm trying to, obviously
The
make.
producers was pretty funny.
What?
The producers was pretty funny.
Well, right. But the thing is, laughter is the best form of medicine and healing. Is the point that I'm trying to make.
Thanks, Ed.
Well, thank you guys. I really appreciate your offering your recollections and insights and everything else. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of people among our listeners that will appreciate it. So thank you again, gentlemen.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
We want to thank Jason and Rob for sharing their remembrances on this sad anniversary. Part 2, featuring the Pentagon side of the story and a returning popular guest, Joe Duffus, will be coming soon. Our thoughts and prayers go out to the survivors, family, and friends of those who were lost that morning 22 years ago. We also want to remember the first responders and site workers that, due to poor protection, became very sick and even died in the months that followed. If you like our work, we'd be honored if you subscribe to Scandal Sheet on your favorite podcast platform and share it with your friends. You can reach us online at scandalsheetpod.com, Facebook, or Twitter, or just send us an email to contact@scandalsheetpod.com. We'll see you next time.
Copyright 2023. Thad Helsley Media LLC. All rights reserved.